Thank you very much, Megan. So, for our final panelist, we're going to now move to Eram Alam, who is a professor at Harvard University, where she teaches in the history of medicine. So, we've gone from information and misinformation and infodemic to broader issues in biosecurity, and now someone whose chief scholarly focus is on the history of medicine, is interacting with longstanding.
Thank you so much to organizers for all of their efforts in putting this together so quickly and for inviting me to contribute a few thoughts and preliminary observations on this present pandemic. So, my talk is called Foreign Bodies, COVID and Xenophobia, and I'm interested in exploring how the virus, as a vector of disease that is foreign to the body, gets collapsed and equated with bodies that are considered foreign to an imagination of the nation. So here I'm really thinking about the terms that I'm sure we've heard: Chinese virus, Kung flu, Wuhan virus, foreign virus. So this rhetorical slippage that happens has significant consequences, I argue. And the most obvious is in the increase in hate crimes and racist incidents against the East Asian American community over the course of the last few months. So, as a historian, I am going to provide a slightly different perspective on this question. And what I am attentive to are the logics and the discursive frames that are really marshaled in these acts of naming and of violence and of excavating the residues from the past that help to explain this present phenomena. So, in the very brief time that I have, I'd like to highlight two historical threads that I think have really come together to activate and embolden xenophobia in relation to COVID-19. So, I teach a course on the history of medicine and health in America. And on the first day of class, which was January 27th, 2020, I showed my students the following set of political cartoons. So, the first is from May 1882 and depicts San Francisco, close to where many of you are at the moment. And emanating from the boats in this image and from a congested residential space are three spectral figures with the words malaria, smallpox, and leprosy written on their garments. And the figure on the far right is sending some kind of vaporous discharge or maintaining some sort of miasmatic link with the region labeled Chinatown. So, just a few weeks prior to the publication of this image, the US Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. This bill was the first piece of immigration legislation that prohibited the entry of Chinese laborers into the United States and also prevented Chinese people who were already in the United States from becoming US citizens. So the passage of this piece of legislation was heavily motivated by the fear of a contaminated Chinese body shedding contagion everywhere, coupled with this economic anxiety about Chinese laborers stealing US jobs. And through this act, I think an antagonistic relation to something, some figuration of what something of Chinese was codified into US law. So the second image that we studied was this one from January 23rd, 2020. And in this illustration, there are shipping boxes labeled with the corona Wuhan virus and a reaper figure on the left saying or thinking, quote, a Chinese export with a tariff you don't want to pay. So in this depiction, the spread of viral contagion is refracted through Trump's trade war with China, once again emphasizing the entanglement between biological and economic logics. So, taken together, these two representations, spaced 138 years apart, do reinforce the idea that an adversarial and paranoid relation to the Chinese body is required to prevent US biological and economic death. And in this project of preserving US life versus Chinese death, every US citizen is always already conscripted, which is my second point. So many scholars have provided an in-depth analysis of this state of permanent war and total war that was inaugurated after World War II and reconfigured and expanded during the War on Terror. So in this new regime, war is no longer an event that occurs on a battlefield between two sides, friend, enemy, bounded by time and space. Instead, it's a permanent state of militarization that enrolls a civilian population in the continual project of risk assessment and mitigation, exemplified in the statement, if you see something, say something, that I'm sure we're all familiar with after the War on Terror. So, in this injunction, identifying and naming an enemy, which is often the enemy, which is often conjured using some combination of history, fantasy, and anxiety, is followed by this rapid commandment to act, justified by the moral imperative of security. So, what total war does is it condenses this reaction time, and delay is a disaster. And in return for this participation and vigilance, there's this promise of total security and total control, and a closed and impervious body politic. So, our present moment is a little bit tricky in relation to this concept. So, when the metaphor of war is explicitly activated against a disease, hospitals become battlefields, care workers are on the front lines, and every patient is a possible warrior. The civilian come patient is called to stand at attention and urgently search for an enemy. But
One
a,
minute.
but a viral threat poses a peculiar kind of challenge for this total war apparatus. So each body has the potential to host a virus, but also to be held hostage by this foreign vector. So the vigilant citizen who's enrolled to surveil the threat can morph into the asymptomatic weapon of mass destruction through a simple doorknob. They can become the very terror that they're enlisted to police, turning into the most intimate kind of enemy and carrying the foreigner within. So this risk becomes omnipresent and uncontainable. And so what we're seeing is an externalization of this unknowability and anxiety into familiar racialized tropes in ways similar to what happened after 9/11. With COVID, though, it's the resurrection of the script which has framed Chinese bodies as diseased and a plague on American life for over a century. And I've been thinking about the language of security and vigilance, which is tied to social distance at this time. And I wonder how conceptions of the social are actually being defined and redefined in this moment, and urge us to think about who gets included in this idea of the social. Thank you.